Welcome to this deep dive, crafted specifically for you. You shared a really thought-provoking academic paper with us recently, and we're keen to explore its insights.
Yeah.
Today, we're focusing on the health, safety, and well-being, let's call it HSW, of people working in retail across Australia.
Mhm.
Our goal is to really understand what's crucial for building, a sustainable future for everyone in this sector. It's often kind of overlooked, isn't it?
It really is. And the paper you mentioned, Supporting Sustainable Futures in Retail by Karanicas and colleagues, published in Sustainability in 2023, it gives us a vital look at this industry.
Right.
Unlike fields we often think of as high risk, like construction or mining, HSW in retail hasn't always got as much research attention.
It's true.
So this study is pretty significant because it actually went out and got perspectives from both the workers on the front lines and the managers.
Absolutely. So think of this as us sort of carefully examining the information, the feedback they gathered to really grasp the current HSW situation in Australian retail from
Yeah.
all angles.
Yeah, trying to get the full picture.
We want to pinpoint the main challenges, highlight what's actually working well, and, ultimately identify opportunities for making things better.
Makes sense.
Okay, let's start by looking at how they actually gathered all this information. What was their approach?
Well, they used what's called the mixed methods approach, which basically means they combined numerical data from online surveys with more in-depth insights from open-ended questions in those same surveys.
Okay, so numbers and stories, essentially.
Exactly. And they surveyed a good number of people, 271 retail workers and 109 managers or owners right across Australia.
That's a decent range of voices. What kind of questions were they asking to get this comprehensive picture?
So both surveys started off with demographic information. For the businesses, they asked about structure, like, is it an independent store, a chain?
Local, national?
Right. And size, the type of retail, location. For the individuals, they collected data on age, role, experience, and, importantly, their sense of job security.
Okay, setting the scene. That context is vital. What about specifics related to the work itself?
For workers, they asked about employment type, full-time, part-time, casual their shift patterns, and if they supervised anyone.
Right.
Managers were asked about recent business changes, like sales volume, staff turnover, things like that.
Okay.
What's really interesting, I think, is that both groups got these open-ended questions.
Yeah.
They're asked, what are the most important positive and negative aspects of HSW in your workplace?
Ah, getting beyond the tick boxes.
Precisely. And also, what actions are you taking or planning to take to improve things? Like, workers were asked, what single thing most positively contributes to your well-being, health, or safety?
That's a great way to understand what really matters to people day to day. What other specific HSW areas did the surveys cover?
They went deep into established OHS principles, covered potential hazards, physical, like lifting,
Manual handling.
chemical, biological, maybe less obvious, but think cleaning products, spoiled goods, ergonomic hazards, how the workspace fits the person, and psychosocial agents. Big one. Stress, harassment, customer interactions.
Yeah, that comes up a lot.
They asked about the HSW support-provided training, awareness of rights, safety structures, the work environment itself.
Okay.
They also explored how challenging the tasks were physically, mentally, and emotionally, and the effects of work on HSW stress, health problems linked to the job, those psychosocial risks, how often they happened.
And how did they measure this? Scales.
Mostly using Likert scales, yeah, where
Oh,
people
yeah.
rate the extent of their experiences or opinions.
Right. Got it. So a really thorough look at the different facets of HSW. How did they make sure the people who responded were actually, representative of the whole Australian retail workforce?
Good question. They actually compared the demographics of their worker sample with data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS.
Okay.
Looked at things like gender balance, employment type, shift predictability, job security, and they found their sample was pretty similar to the national data.
That gives us more confidence in the findings then, doesn't it?
Definitely. It suggests what they found is likely reflective of experiences across the country.
And the analysis. How did they handle all that data, the numbers and the text answers?
So the qualitative stuff, the open-ended responses, they use thematic analysis, which means carefully reading through to find key themes, recurring patterns about the good, the bad, and the ideas for improvement.
Makes sense.
For the quantitative data, the numbers, they used specific statistical tests, non-parametric tests,
Yeah.
and they set a pretty strict significance level being careful about drawing conclusions.
Okay, sounds like a really rigorous approach all around. So let's get to the heart of it, the results. What were the main findings about how work actually impacts the health, safety, and well-being of these retail workers?
Okay, well, one of the first key things was stress. Workers generally reported moderate levels of stress.
Moderate. Okay.
But what's interesting is that non-skilled staff, think apprentices, students they reported feeling a bit more stressed than their more experienced colleagues.
Maybe less control, more pressure.
Could be. And managers in the bigger chains and larger stores also perceived slightly higher stress levels in their workers. So, some hints of pressure points there already.
Yeah, you can imagine the scale of larger operations adding to that. What about the work itself, the tasks? How challenging did people find them?
Generally, tasks were seen as moderately challenging physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Moderately, but
But, and this is significant, about 20%, so 1 in 5 workers, reported their work was very or extremely challenging in each of those categories.
1 in 5. Wow. Physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Yeah. And workers in the national or regional chains, bigger retailers, and those working longer shifts,
Yeah.
they particularly highlighted the emotional challenge.
That emotional side, it's often underestimated in retail, I think. Dealing with people, targets.
Absolutely. It takes a toll. And it really underscores that the job isn't just about lifting boxes or standing all day.
Right. So what about the actual health impacts? Physical, mental?
This is where it gets quite striking, maybe a bit concerning. A big majority, 72% of workers, said they experience physical health issues at least once a year that they linked to their work.
72%. That's huge.
It is. And 58.1% reported mental health issues related to their job. Again, at least once a year.
And these weren't just minor things.
No, these were issues affecting their performance or needing medical attention. And then there's the psychosocial risks.
Harassment, abuse.
Exactly. Over half, 56.8%, face those risks from internal or external sources at least annually, and almost 20% experience this 4 or more times a year.
Nearly 1 in 5 facing that multiple times a year. That's awful.
It's a really significant number facing regular negative interactions.
Were certain groups more affected?
Yes, the study found some links. People working more Sundays and public holidays reported more frequent mental health issues.
Okay.
Those workers, plus those in national regional chains and those with lower job security, were also more likely to be victims of psychosocial risks.
Job security again.
Yeah. And interestingly, managers in large retailers also noted a higher frequency of these risks for their staff. So there seems to be some awareness there.
So working those antisocial hours, feeling insecure, it really seems to pile on the pressure.
It certainly looks that way.
What about how people viewed these problems? Did they see them as solvable or just part of the job?
This is quite alarming, actually. A substantial portion felt these negative HSW situations were, basically an inevitable part of working in retail.
Really? Like what?
Cognitive issues, like difficulty concentrating almost a third, 32.7%, physical injuries, 45.6%, and negative emotions over half, 50.6%.
Half the workers felt negative emotions were just unavoidable.
That's what the data suggests. And those working mainly alone were more likely to see the cognitive issues as inescapable.
That points to a potentially worrying level of acceptance, doesn't it? Like, this is just how it is.
Exactly. And if people feel that way, they might be less likely to report things, less likely to seek change. It's a real barrier.
Definitely. Okay, so that's the impact. What about the support systems? What did the study find there?
Overall, workers felt their environment moderately supported their HSW. But over a quarter, 27.1% reported feeling little to no support at all.
More than 1 in 4. That's significant.
It is. And perhaps unsurprisingly, workers with lower job security felt much less supported by their employers.
That link again. It makes sense if you're worried about your job stability.
You might not feel the company's really looking out for your well-being.
Exactly. It undermines that perception of support.
What about specific types of support, like training and information? TEI, they called it.
Right. TEI. For occupational hygiene and ergonomics, it was generally rated as good.
Okay.
But for psychosocial risks, stress, harassment, etc., the TEI was only rated as average. And a notable chunk of workers said they got poor or even no TEI in that critical area.
That seems like a major gap, given the reported issues. It does. And interestingly, businesses with lower sales tended to provide less ergonomics training. And again, lower job security was linked to lower quality TEI across all 3 areas: hygiene, ergonomics, psychosocial.
So when times are tough financially or people feel insecure, That essential safety training might suffer.
It looks that way, yeah. Seems like it might be one of the first things to get squeezed.
Okay. What about awareness of rights and the formal safety structures like OHS officers or committees?
About two-thirds of workers knew about OHS roles or structures in their companies, and they had moderate familiarity with their own rights and obligations and their employers,
Moderate. So a third didn't really know.
or had little familiarity, yeah. But importantly, in businesses with those OHS roles, workers reported better training in hygiene and ergonomics.
Ah, so having dedicated people makes a difference.
It seems so. Managers confirm this too, less adequate TEI in businesses without OHS roles. It really highlights the value of specialist support.
Definitely sounds like it. Any other factors influencing awareness of rights?
Yeah, less time working for a specific retailer meant lower familiarity with the employer's obligations.
Makes sense. Less exposure.
Full-timers were more familiar than part-timers, who were more familiar than casuals. And consistently, lower job security meant less familiarity with rights for both employees and employers.
Wait, employers with lower job security knew less about their own obligations.
That's what the data suggests for employers in businesses without OHS roles. They showed less familiarity with their own duties. That's a bit of a red flag, isn't it?
It certainly is. If the employer isn't clear on their responsibilities. Okay, what about the broader work environment? Technical, social, organizational.
Oh, perceived as somewhat adequate. The technical side procedures, equipment, the social side colleagues, communication and organizational workload structure.
Somewhat adequate, but again, a but.
But again, a significant minority rated them as inadequate. Workers in places without OHS roles rated the technical environment lower.
Okay.
Younger, non-skilled, and non-native English-speaking workers rated the social environment lower.
It's interesting vulnerability points there.
And yes, lower job security was linked to lower ratings across all three environment types: technical, social, and organizational.
Job security just keeps popping up as this major underlying factor.
It really does seem central to how workers perceive almost everything about their HSW.
What about things like staff turnover and absenteeism? Did the study link those to HSW?
Absolutely clear connection. Higher staff turnover in the past year, that correlated with lower reported HSW support, less adequate social and organizational environments,
Okay.
and also higher worker stress, more physical and mental health issues, more psychosocial risks, and tougher physical and emotional challenges.
Wow, a whole suite of negative outcomes.
Yeah. And higher absenteeism showed a similar pattern linked to more stress, health issues, psychosocial risks, and higher perceived demands. It really signals that when people are leaving or off sick a lot, it's often a symptom of deeper HSW problems.
Paints a clear picture, doesn't it? High turnover and absence as warning signs. Now, the study got data from workers and managers. How did their views compare? Did they see things the same way?
That's a crucial comparison. In some areas, yeah, they generally align. Average stress levels, the physical and cognitive challenges of tasks, frequency of health issues, and psychosocial risks.
Okay.
Even that feeling that some negative stuff was unavoidable. And familiarity with OHS rights. Managers were kind of on the same page on average.
There's always a but, it seems.
But there were some significant differences. Managers tended to underestimate the emotional challenges staff faced.
Ah.
And they overestimated the adequacy of the HSW support they provided.
Right.
They also had a rosier view of the quality of TEI for hygiene, ergonomics, and psychosocial risks, and the quality of the technical, social, and organizational environments compared to their workers.
So a bit of a disconnect there. Managers thinking things are better than the staff experience them.
Exactly. A perception gap. And that's critical, because if management thinks everything's fine, or better than it is, they might not see the need for change, or their efforts might miss the mark.
That could definitely hinder real improvement. What about the qualitative side? Those open-ended questions. What main themes came out from the workers' own words?
Overwhelmingly, the biggest negative for workers was high and unreasonable job demands and workload.
Like what specifically?
Standing for ages, constant pressure, heavy lifting. And it got worse during peak times, like Christmas or sales.
Predictable, but clearly a major issue. What else?
Poor or unfair management was another big one, feeling unsupported, not cared for. And aggressive or disrespectful customers, huge source of stress, even verbal abuse reported.
Yeah, that customer interaction piece is tough.
Low staffing and high turnover also came up a lot, making busy periods even harder. Plus, poor social environments, feeling the company didn't focus on HSW, bad breaks, unfair scheduling. It paints a vivid picture.
Some really tough, stressful conditions. What about the positives? What did workers say made things better?
The social side was huge. Good relationships with colleagues, teamwork, that was a major positive for well-being.
The human connection.
Definitely. And supportive management supervisors showing empathy, giving good training, showing appreciation. That was highly valued.
Some sense. Anything else?
General job satisfaction, some flexibility, a stable environment, positive culture, having HSW programs available,
Mm-hmm.
adequate pay, and enough breaks were also mentioned. It really highlights how much that supportive human element matters.
It sounds like those relationships and feeling valued can really buffer some of the tougher aspects of the job. Did workers mention any specific HSW initiatives they knew about?
Some did. About 30 mentioned employee assistance programs, EAPs, for counseling.
Okay.
Around 18 describe various training things, online modules, safety sessions. Others mention flexible work, scheduled breaks, team building, support from colleagues or supervisors.
So some initiatives exist.
They do, but the relatively small numbers mentioning them suggest they might not be universally available or maybe not well promoted. It seems like there's room for more consistent effort.
Yeah, sounds like it. Okay, what about the managers and owners? What did they say in the open-ended responses? Positives and negatives for their workers.
Managers saw supportive culture and good communication as the biggest positives for worker HSW, followed by a good social environment and job satisfaction. They also mentioned supportive management, benefits, mental health support, but less often.
Okay, and the negatives from their perspective.
Echoing the workers, aggressive customers was a major issue they saw. Also, poor social environment sometimes, high job demands, and interestingly, a perceived lack of appreciation for mental health and safety.
Lack of appreciation.
Yeah, often linked by managers to tight budgets or lack of training for themselves.
Ah, so they felt limited sometimes.
Seems so. Other negatives they mentioned: pressure, staff shortages, lack of staff training, employee dissatisfaction, absenteeism, poor communication, complacency about safety, lack of control for workers.
It's interesting, some overlap with workers, especially customers and workload, but also some different emphasis. What about their plans for improvement? What were managers planning to do?
Well, interestingly, almost a third of the managers didn't mention any specific current or planned actions for HSW.
Really? A third had no plans.
That's what the responses indicated. But some did mention plans. More training was common, especially on handling difficult customers, manual tasks, general safety.
Okay.
Others talked about improving communication, involving staff more, listening to concerns, and a smaller number mentioned introducing or improving mental health support programs.
So some action, but that large group with no mentioned plans suggests a potential gap in proactive management, doesn't it?
It certainly could, yeah. Room for a more widespread proactive approach, perhaps.
Okay, let's shift into the discussion now. Pulling it all together, what were some of the key theoretical implications the researchers highlighted?
One of the most striking things, theoretically, was that individual worker demographics, age, gender, education, they didn't strongly correlate with most HSW variables.
So it wasn't necessarily about who the worker was.
Exactly. It suggests the main drivers are more about the job itself, the organization, the systems in place, rather than personal characteristics.
Right.
And the fact managers didn't often blame staff demographics in their open responses supports that. The big implication: retailers should probably focus more on systemic improvements, things that benefit everyone, not just focusing on individual workers.
That's a powerful takeaway. Focus on the system, not just the person. Were there any demographic factors that did seem to matter?
Yes, a few.
Yep.
Language seemed to be a barrier for the social environment. Non-native English speakers rated it lower.
Okay.
Younger workers and non-skilled workers also found this social environment less supportive, and non-skilled workers reported higher stress.
Some vulnerability there.
Yeah, it highlights the need to consider diverse needs within the workforce, making sure support is inclusive and accessible for everyone.
What about the businesses themselves? Did size or type of store make a difference?
Interestingly, location and the specific retail group didn't seem to have a huge impact on support or effects, which suggests the findings might be pretty broadly applicable across Australia, different sectors.
Okay, general trends.
Although larger retailers and chains did tend to have slightly more stressed workers, more challenging work, higher psychosocial risk, that kind of aligns with other research on bigger companies, sometimes having more demanding environments.
Right, the pressures of scale, perhaps. What about having those dedicated OHS people in the company? What were the implications there?
Really clear positive influence. Where OHS roles existed, Workers got better training on hygiene and ergonomics, the technical environment was rated better, and even managers seemed more aware of their own duties.
So having that specialist support really pays off.
It strongly suggests it does, yeah. Dedicated resources matter.
And job security, we kept hearing about that. What were the theoretical implications?
It was just consistently linked to negative outcomes. Lower security meant poorer support, worse training, worse environments, less familiarity with rights, more psychosocial risks.
Across the board.
Pretty much. It really reinforces how profoundly insecurity can impact well-being. It lines up with loads of research showing insecurity leads to stress, anxiety, even physical health problems, and makes people less likely to follow safety rules or speak up. Stable employment seems key for a good HSW climate.
Makes total sense. That constant worry must just permeate everything. But what about shifts? Weekend work? Any theoretical points there?
The study didn't find big effects from things like split shifts or predictability overall, but working Sundays and public holidays was linked to more mental health issues and psychosocial risks.
Okay.
So while not the main focus, it does kind of indirectly support other research suggesting a potential emotional and social cost to working those less conventional hours.
Right. Even if the physical risks aren't the main thing, there's a toll. Okay, let's pivot to the practical side. What are the key takeaways for retailers, policymakers, anyone looking to actually improve things?
Okay, practically. That manager perception gap is huge. The potential disconnect between managers' views and staff reality.
The underestimating emotional challenges, overestimating support.
Exactly. If managers don't see the true picture, their efforts might be ineffective or misplaced. Retailers really need to bridge that gap. HSW needs to be core strategy, not just a compliance tick box, if they want a sustainable workforce and good performance.
Absolutely. You can't fix problems you don't accurately see. What about that significant chunk of employees feeling unsupported? Practical implications.
Yeah, over a quarter feeling that way.
Yeah.
It's a major risk. Combine that with poor environments or training, you've got problems. Inadequate training, especially on psychosocial risks, means low awareness, low skills in reporting or managing hazards.
Right.
And if workers don't know their rights, they might just accept unsafe conditions as normal, which is terrible for them and bad for business long term.
And that links straight back to that worrying finding about workers seeing negative things as just inescapable, doesn't it?
It does. The qualitative data hinted at this fatalism, maybe learned helplessness, feeling powerless. If people think it's just retail, it's always like this, they won't push for change.
A dangerous mindset.
Totally against the whole point of OHS laws, which are about preventing harm, minimizing risk. Retailers need to actively challenge that perception, empower people to engage.
A culture shift needed. What about the frequency of health issues reported in the study versus official stats? Any practical implications there?
Yeah, another critical point. The study found much higher rates of self-reported work-related health issues, physical, mental, psychosocial, than official serious claims data usually shows.
Suggesting underreporting.
Likely significant underreporting, yeah. Or maybe the impacts are just broader than what gets formally captured. Either way, it's bad. Individuals aren't getting support or recognition. Retailers don't see the true scale of the problem, so they can't prevent it effectively. Leads to higher costs down the line, lower productivity, more absence, bad reputation. Addressing that underreporting is vital.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? Problems aren't reported, so they don't get fixed, so they continue. What about the bigger picture for the industry? Attracting people.
Well, if retail gets a reputation for poor HSW, for being a place where harm and hardship are common, that's going to make it really hard to attract and keep good people.
Especially now when people have more choices.
Exactly. People want workplaces where they feel valued, supported, safe, where they can grow. Sustainable employability relies on that. If retail is seen as damaging, it'll struggle to find and retain the workforce it needs for long-term success.
A really key point for the future of the sector. So, pulling all this together, what practical recommendations did the researchers suggest?
Okay, first, identify and maintain the positive things you already have. Good social dynamics, supportive managers, whatever works well. Don't lose sight of those.
Build on strengths.
Right. Then, actively work to ensure work demands aren't excessive. Look at workload, physical strain, work-life balance. Make it manageable.
Okay.
They recommend a holistic approach. Look at everything that impacts HSW HR policies, management styles, training, culture. See how it all interacts.
Not just isolated initiatives.
Exactly. Also, recognize the changing nature of work gig economy aspects. Automation. Think about the new HSW risks these might bring.
Be proactive.
Crucially, actively seek worker input. continuously. Understand their perspectives, needs, ideas. They're the experts on their own experience.
Makes sense.
And make a real effort to accommodate vulnerable groups, newer staff, less skilled, insecure workers, non-native speakers, those working alone. Their needs might be different.
Taylor,
And finally, foster a culture where reporting HSW issues is safe, encouraged, judgment-free, where concerns are taken seriously, acted upon, and people get feedback. Show that speaking up makes a difference.
those all sound like really important, actionable steps. Okay, to wrap up our deep dive, let's hit the main conclusions. What are the absolute key takeaways for listeners?
I think this deep dive really hammers home that a significant slice of the Australian retail workforce faces tough demands without enough HSW support.
Yeah.
And that evidence of underreporting, plus that potential acceptance that hardship is just part of the job, that fatalism, that's a critical issue needing urgent attention.
It really
There
is.
seems to be this misalignment, huge focus on customer satisfaction, right?
Yeah.
But maybe not an equally strong commitment to the well-being of the people delivering that satisfaction. That imbalance needs looking at.
Definitely sounds like a major wake-up call for the sector and for anyone who values these workers.
Absolutely. The research strongly suggests many retailers aren't taking that holistic systems thinking approach to HSW. Just relying on current benefits or assuming things are okay might not be sustainable, especially with a changing workforce.
So what's needed?
Strategic, proactive changes. Better, more personalized education and training on hazards. Real support from OHS professionals and structures. These things can help accommodate diverse workers, cut turnover and absence, improve safety overall, and make sure employers are actually meeting their obligations.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? If a big part of the retail workforce feels that harm and hardship are just baked into the job, what does that really say about how we as a society value this essential work? And you have to wonder, how might a genuine focus on supporting the health and safety of these workers not only benefit them hugely, but also help build a more resilient, more sustainable, and maybe even more successful retail sector for everyone in the long run?
A crucial question.
Definitely something important to keep considering. Thanks so much for this incredibly insightful deep dive into such important research.